Hi, Corrine Murray here, Terminated nurse from BC. I'm making another video here. This will mostly be interesting to BC nurses, anybody that is attached to the nurses union, and anyone who's interested in that particular part of what's going on in the province. If this doesn't interest you, don't watch this. Okay, so this last week I went to the BC Nurses Annual Convention. This is where 500 representatives from around BC come together at the Hyatt Regency in Vancouver, and then they have different motions and things that they discuss and do voting on things and policies that need to be changed. I applied to be one of the delegates. I was not chosen, and so I actually went down as an unfunded observer, which means I went at my own cost to participate in this three-day event that was in Vancouver. I will just disclose at this point that as of March 31st, I did not renew my license as a nurse in this province. So I am no longer considered to be a nurse here. And this was a decision that I based on the political threat that I see that is now invading the healthcare professions in this province. And also just the attachment to lack of representation from the union and the lack of safety for nurses that's occurring. I did not feel that it was a safe profession to be in anymore. So I am no longer a nurse, which means I am no longer benefiting from continuing to try to advocate for terminated nurses. I will not be going back to nursing, but there has to be some ability to draw to the attention of the public what has been going on. So just wanted to let you guys know that. During this convention, there were, the very first thing that I'm going to tell you so that you can stop watching if you want to, is that finally the BC Nurses Union has proceeded with the grievances of the terminated nurses, and we are going to go to arbitration. There is now, for those who don't know what an arbitrator is, basically it would be comparable to going before a judge in the court system, but because we're unionized, we have to use labor board and arbitrators. So the dates have been set, March of 2024, for our cases to be heard before an arbitrator, Jackie DeGuayo, I believe is her name. She does come with very high respect and qualifications, so that was a good choice. We are, of course, concerned that it is going to take another 10 months before our cases are heard, but it is in process, and if there is any openings previous to that date, they will try to bring us forward sooner. There was some talk that possibly September there might be something that occurs. So that's the highlights. Many of the nurses were not informed that this actually had progressed, and some have gotten letters, most of us have not. And so I was forwarded one, and basically the letter does say that the union is taking the position that because the employer did act in a way that was contrary to the collective agreement, that the affected nurses have lost wages, benefits, service, and seniority. They have suffered injury to their dignity under the Human Rights Code, and that the union is seeking the immediate reinstatement of these affected nurses, and that they are pursuing that we will be made whole in terms of wages, benefits, service, and seniority. Also, damages for any affected nurses who experience injury to their dignity. There was one sentence here that I don't really understand, but it is that there have been several preliminary issues that have been raised by the health employers, which will be addressed at case management meetings over the summer months. So I don't have any comment for that. It is part of this, so I don't know if some of you will be contacted about that. I'm going to just state some of the things that during the convention were communicated by the executive. And I am sharing this because, as I said, there are 500 delegates that show up at the convention, but there are over 48,000 nursing members to this union that weren't able to participate in this. And I think you should know some of the components that are taking place right now. So there was the ability for people to come to the mic and share some of their challenges that they're experiencing. There was quite a few nurses who came up and were talking about workplace bullying, the fact that there's many issues that they're having that are not getting resolution. And BCNU actually did state several times that they are having difficulty enforcing this agreement as everyone seems to be accountable to no one. This message seemed to be repeated several times, that the union did not seem to be in a place where it was actually able to enforce this agreement, which is challenging because that is the union's primary function. There were comments about that the nurse-patient ratios that are trying to be put into the contract. The CEO mentioned they need to keep their promise. We're going to push for that. Our job is to hold them to account. Okay, so again, it is the union's job to hold them to account. They did mention that travel agency nurses, that has increased by 250% over the last year, and that the union has still not been able to enforce the employers to pay the dues that those travel agency nurses should be contributing. So that was interesting. There has been a big increase in line vacancies. In 2020, there were around 2,000. That has now increased to 5,000. Again, there was no mention ever of terminated nurses and the impact that the thousands of nurses have contributed to all of these vacancies. CEO also said he's calling out the abuse. The implementation of this contract, this last bargaining contract that was just passed, is going to take time. There have been pay increases that have only been showing up in some of the health authorities, and there has been quite a bit of confusion and chaos around the new payroll grid because it is quite complex, and there was a lot of concerns expressed around how's anyone going to keep track of their pay when there are so many new components that are impacting it. This was also an issue because when the terminated nurses had a meeting with executive last November during the annual general meeting, we were told at that time that there was over 2,000 active grievances in process. Currently, there are 4,283. And it looks like there was only, I think the number was just over 1,200 that were processed this last year. So that communicated to me two things. One, there is a huge increase in problems in the workplace, that grievances are having to be filed, but also the rate that they're able to process them. For the current list that's in process, we're looking at 3 years before those ones are even dealt with. So this was kind of an issue. We also have that the provincial government has now given $100 million to BCNU. Now, this wasn't really broken down into what it is designated for because it's coming as restricted, which means it has to be used for certain expenses. So I believe they said 33 million is going to go to the recruitment and retention of nurses, but that did not apply to terminated nurses. There's going to be an amount that is designated to help provide more mental health supports for nurses. But again, that didn't apply to terminated nurses, even though this whole experience with this has been very traumatic. There has been absolutely no support given to any of these members, and this continues. The rest of that 100 million, they didn't really specify. There's been a lot of emphasis on this diversity, inclusion, in equity that they're trying to include. This is apparently so that we can create more of a, cooperation with nurses, inclusivity. What I did find interesting is that I'm going to highlight one thing because this is just sort of an example of something I think we need to just think about and practice. So there's a lot of talk about how we need to be inclusive. And the beginning of the convention, all the members who stood up identified themselves as she and her, and I am a person of a minority, I'm a person of disability. The thing I found interesting was on the bathrooms, there were signs up that said non-gender. And what I found interesting is that this was actually not discussed with the membership at large. We were just told that all the bathrooms now were going to include both men and women. And this created, for some members, a lot of discomfort. And yet there was no place that they could actually express that because they would be shamed for not being inclusive. Now, the CEO actually brought up a component of this, which I thought was fair. He just said, okay, what exactly is the protocols now? So if women can come into the men's bathrooms, should men be using the urinals or should they just stay to the stalls? It is a fair question. I actually appreciated that somebody is talking about how we're supposed to incorporate new societal decisions that we're supposed to comply with, but nobody's informed us how to do it. He was actually shamed for that remark. And I was not really happy with that. I thought it was fair. I also thought it was fair that if they really were going to make decisions that impacted everyone, that everyone should have been consulted about this. Are you comfortable with the fact that somebody from the opposite sex may come in while you're trying to do your personal business? So this concept of inclusivity seems to be that only certain groups of people actually get those protections and rights, while other groups aren't allowed to really express what makes them feel uncomfortable because then they are accused of being discriminatory. So I'm just going to bring that up because chances are I'm never going to be at another annual convention. And I think it's fair that people can say, we can put one bathroom for both if people really want to do that. But these are private spaces that actually are protected by human rights. And if women would prefer to be in a bathroom that just has women, they should also have that protection. Okay, so I'm just going to put that in as a side note. During the financial presentation, it was brought up that, or the financial report, it was brought up that there had been a whistleblower complaint to the union, and the attitude that was presented in was a little bit condescending. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up was because, full disclosure, I submitted a whistleblower complaint about how the union was refusing to answer our questions around finances. Now, over the last year and a half, because of our investigating what's happened in terms of the breach of the collective agreement and the abuse of firing nurses, we have actually been able to have interviews with 2 accounting firms with their forensic team. We have had assistance from legal teams. We actually have recorded interviews with former BCNU executives. We have the services of a financial fraud analyst. And so because of this access to professional layers that have more information, it was actually some significant questions were created. And in November, when Terminated nurses came to the annual convention, we did inform the nurses union that we would like to be able to speak to them because they had refused to communicate with us, and their response was to have security at the door. This was a problem. We were able to get by and did have a meeting with the executive. And following that, we created an 18-page document that had very specific questions around the finances. So the fact that the retiree benefits fund was not being used for its intended purpose, that there was a lot of money going to the 250 employees of the BC Nurses Union, and yet representation for the nurses themselves was non-existent. Those were the kinds of questions that we wanted, and we wanted specific answers around it. We sent that document to BCNU executive 4 times. So that included their financial people, their legal people, the executive. They refused to answer any of our questions. So as of January, I then used the BCNU policy, the whistleblower policy, and submitted this under that umbrella. Again, we have had no response to any of those questions. However, during convention, it was communicated that this whistleblower policy then had to go to KPMG, the accountants, for review. According to the party that reviewed itself, there was no flagged issues. It did cost the union $9,000. And as a result, their risk level has actually increased as well. I'm actually quite happy about that because all the union needed to do was answer our questions, and they refused to do that. So at least there is some way that we can make sure that there is accountability that is being not pressured, but exerted in a way that there are other parties that are having to look at what's going on. And that's significant. Now, the reason why I actually went down to the annual convention was because I put forth a resolution that I wanted the membership to vote in favor of a forensic audit done on the union. The union currently is running $500 million in assets, and there's over 48,000 members. There's been a high turnover in staff, and the union itself has had a history of over 6 years. There was embezzlement that occurred that was not caught by the accountants because of the level of accounting that is done. There's different levels of investigation, and the one that the union currently uses allowed this embezzlement to happen for 6 years undetected. It was only a fellow employee that reported it, that it was finally caught. So I am asking for a forensic audit. Now, the purpose of this is I'll use it like, so currently, I'll use it like a medical picture. So currently, the level of financial audit we have would be like asking for a CBC and a chest x-ray. What I'm asking for is I want a consult with a specialist. I want blood gases. I want, what's that when you want the blood cultures? I want a CT scan. I want an in-depth review of the function of the union and where the money is going to ensure that we actually have the best structures in place to support nurses. Because from what I was hearing from the nurses that were speaking, we need help. It's not working well. We need help. So I was getting messages from nurses around BC that in the pre-convention meetings, this resolution was being presented as it's coming from an unvaccinated nurse, conspiratist theory. We're going to have to watch the people who are voting in favor of this. And in many of those meetings, the discussion around why this resolution was presented was shut down. And I thought, okay, so now I have to go down and babysit the union to make sure that at least this is presented in a way that is non-discriminatory and ethical. So that's why I went down, to ensure that this resolution was brought forward without any bias. When my resolution actually came to the table, you're allowed 2 minutes to speak. And so I had to somehow get enough information into that 2 minutes to be able to educate all of this group why this really is a good idea. But the union itself did not want this to happen. And so as a result, there was quite a lineup of people who were opposing it. And so, they're allowed to do that. And then it was quickly called to vote, which it was voted down, overwhelmingly voted down, which is fine. My biggest goal was I want, especially the executive, to be aware that there are people watching. And I was hoping actually that the executive would go, if there's questions over the handling of our money, we actually welcome the chance to have someone else come in, take a look, and make sure that we're running things well. That was not the case. In fact, there were 2 council members that were actively opposing, and there were some very interesting statements made, like it was going to cost millions of dollars and take years. And I was able to at least speak to that and say, I've talked to 3 accounting firms, like actually talked to the forensic departments. I know that it may start costing at $100,000, and it would only go up if there's actual errors that were detected on BCNU statements. So it's difficult getting a fair view of this when there was deliberate lies that were being presented. I actually have to say, too, there was one person that stood up, Rob Laval, I believe his name is. I don't know who he is. But he stated, the membership should be aware that if we allow this forensic audit to occur and that something is found, we could lose our tax-free status because we're a nonprofit. And I have really big concerns about the fact that you have representation in the union that is telling you to accept fraud in exchange so that you can protect your tax-free status. So that's so not cool. Okay, what was the other thing I wanted to tell you? Oh, yes. So the big thing that I presented to the membership was currently right now, union dues are about $60 million per year. The government just gave your union $100 million. So even though the union's job is to hold the government accountable, the union is now taking more money from the government than it is from the nurses. How does this not compromise your ability to enforce what you need to do to protect yourselves? This is significant. And I did not say this blatantly at the convention, but this union has been bought off. Your ability to be protected has been compromised. There is no way that this union can hold a government accountable that is paying it more money than you are. So you need to be aware of this. Somebody asked about that there's elections coming up. There was asking me, if I had an opinion about anything. I can only give you opinions of the people that I have interacted with, and I'd be happy to tell you the names of the people that so far I recommend and have felt that they have communicated appropriately, have really done work in my realm. And so I'm going to list off the names of the people that I feel have integrity, and you do what you want with it, okay? So I have Adrienne Gear. I have Shalane Wisnowski and Rianne Laurie from the West Kootenay region. Julie Peters from the Pacific Rim. Both Lauren Burkhart and Scott Duval. They communicated quickly, actually implemented things that needed to be dealt with. And so those ones, I can tell you, I feel confident that they are actually working well for us. Sharon, the treasurer, I'm sure that she's very experienced in what's going on, but I have had absolutely no response to any of those financial questions from either her or David Tsai. And I'm always concerned when there is a lack of disclosure. And this, it felt like I actually had to speak up and say, I don't think anybody should be shamed for asking for greater transparency. And it was actually, my resolution was appreciated because, if you can believe it, no one has ever brought up financial stuff in convention before. So somebody needs to keep that up. Okay, so I'm just going to end on, there's a few action things that have to happen. I was speaking with legal. Because of this arbitration thing that's going on, there's a few things that the union would like from us. The first thing is impact statements. So for nurses that, one, have been terminated, what your story is, how that happened, how it impacted you, not just financially, but your own identity, your whole practice skills. And while I was there, I actually interacted with a few nurses who came to me and said that they really felt coerced into having to take this vaccination against their will. So I'm also going to say, if there is coerced nurses, I believe that your impact statement should also be part of this response that is going to go forward for arbitration. Your voices, your experience has not been heard or identified, and yet you are a big part of what has occurred with the mandatory vaccination. So this needs to be, make it as a Word document or some kind of document, and you're going to send it to Deb Charrois. It's DCHARROIS at BCNU.org. Just put in the subject line, terminated nurse impact statement or coerced nurse impact statement. She's asking for these to submit to the arbitration. The second thing is that they are also asking us for the most recent peer-reviewed data on the efficacy of both masks and vaccines. I said we'd be happy to provide that. I was wondering if BCNU would actually mind paying us for all the work that we're doing, and she said you can ask, but you won't get it. I would say for anyone who is still in this union in a couple of years at the, or next year at the next convention, keep track of what's going on with your retiree benefit fund. If it does seem like you are not getting answers on the money that is being handled by this union, this resolution should be brought forward again where you are asking for a forensic audit to get involved. I think it's very important that the union members know what's going on with this money and that it is being handled on your behalf. I'm going to make a comment about the COO position. I haven't really seen anything tangible come out of whatever this role is, and you probably should consider removing it from the executive. Just a recommendation. The other thing I'm going to say is you need to stop taking money from the government. Your whole protection and ability to be able to enforce what this agreement is has been removed from you in exchange for the money that you're getting, which is not really, I don't think, benefiting you. So that's my piece. I know this is long. Here's the update, and I'll keep you informed. Okay, bye.